Scrutiny Committee. First of all, I'd just like to remind you that we are being live streamed, so please keep your language decent before the 9 o'clock watershed. And we also have, if I can deal with it, must get out of the way now. We've got apologies from Councillor Dennis, who's still on maternity leave, as we know, and Councillor Buck is here in her place. And Councillor MacDonald will be a little bit late, will be joining us later on. Councillor Jason O'Cheery is here because, although he wasn't here on Monday, he was following us on the live stream. So he's fully briefed and has been a remote party to all our discussions, so he's fully aware of what we said and debated. Okay, so Doreen, do you want to come now and just say a few words before we get any further into the meeting? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just a very brief recap. As you will know, the scrutiny function transferred to myself under Law and Democracy on the 2nd of January. And I think I sent a note out saying that we had appointed an acting head of overview scrutiny, which is Everton, so very well done, Everton. Everton will not formally take up post until the 11th of February, so at the moment he's basically just helping me to support the scrutiny function at the moment. But if there are any issues that members want to raise or any concerns, please do contact me directly. And after the 11th of February, Everton will formally take up post, and I'm looking forward to working with members of the committee to plan out this scrutiny programme and how we are going to work moving forward under our new leadership. So I'm very much delighted. So congratulations, Everton.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's any specific questions that the committee would like to raise with me.
Are there any particular questions at this moment in time? I'm sure there isn't, but...
No, just a small comment. Just to say thank you very much for the questions and answers. Excellent.
Yeah, just
I know it's an outline, doesn't matter. We are very, well, I'm personally very happy to have something to remind me what I said. But sometimes I just forget. So thank you very much for that. It really helps enormously.
It's not quite complete, but I have the rest of my notes.
Very good.
We always like to hear praise.
Yes, we always do that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I don't think there's any immediate. I don't think there's any immediate questions at this moment in time. But obviously, as sorry, he has got one. Sorry, it always happens to me.
We wait until you say there's no more.
Yeah. There's maybe one for after the 11th of February, but do we have a timeline on the other bit of recruitment? Yeah.
I've taken the liberty to have a brief discussion with Everton about that, and my own view is that I will be moving to look for at least an interim appointment to that next week, because I do think we need to bring in the resource to support the scrutiny function, I think sooner rather than later. And I think in the, it's one less thing for Everton to have to do when he takes up appointments. We discussed this yesterday, didn't we, Everton? And the view is that I would take that forward on his behalf over the next couple of weeks. I'm mindful to go internally. I do think we've got the talent in-house where we could find somebody who would like a development opportunity. So the idea would be to put out certainly an acting up opportunity for a period of time and to get expressions of interest within the organisation.
Okay, so feel free to apply. Okay, right. Well, no doubt we will come back to you at some stage. Thanks very much, Doreen. Okay, if I can move on to item 2, notification of any items of business which the Chair deems urgent. I don't think there's anything else. Is there, Everton?
There are no late items, Chair.
Thank you. If you move then on to item 3, disclosure of interest and dispensations. I don't think there's any disclosures other than what we already declare on the council's web page? Anything else? No? Thank you very much. That's done with that one. Item 4 is the policy resources strategy. This is just here for our information, I believe, Everton,
That is correct.
in the background paper.
And it's now got the correct appendices as well.
Which was going to be one of my points, but there we have it. It preempted me. Okay, so that's just there for our information when we talk about item 6, yeah? Good, thank you. Good. So we can move on, without further ado, to hear Councillor Williams talk about the housing revenue account, item 5, please.
Sorry, Chair, whilst Councillor Williams is coming to the table, there's just a couple of apologies I need to report, which I didn't report to you at the beginning of the meeting. Councillor Vicky Mills is unable to attend. Martin Bretnell is unwell, so he's not able to attend this meeting. And we've also got apologies from Eleanor Kelly.
Right, thank you very much. That's very kind. Thanks. I'm tempted to say you've only got 5 minutes, but as we're not interviewing any other cabinet member, you can talk for as long as you like.
When I was first born. No, so let me talk to the housing revenue account. So members will know the housing revenue account, our ring-fenced account that is there for all activities related to our council homes. Overall, this current year, the account is £261 million, and the changes we're making here will take it up to £268.7 million. It's worth saying just a little bit of context. I think members may know some of this, but 3 years ago, we agreed to have to put consultation with tenants to put our rents up by CPI inflation plus 1%. We had that discussion with tenants on the basis of saying we do need more investment in our stock to continue to keep it in a good condition, to make our estates great places to live. And we pressed on with that. The government then imposed a period where we had to reduce rents by 1%. And now that was a huge change. We plan our housing revenue account over a 30-year life cycle. Over that life cycle, that reduced the total funding coming through by about £800 million. So it was a huge difference to what we were able to do. In the short term, it meant we had to cut back on a number of investments we had been looking to make in the quality and condition of the stock and other services. This year, the government has gone back and said that once again, councils nationally can put rent up by CPI plus 1%. So we have proposed to do that again, and you'll see in here that the document sets that out. We've gone out to consultation with tenants on that and had positive feedback from our Tenants Council and local area housing forums in support of that change, and obviously they see the case for slightly higher rents, a difficult thing for some people particularly to bear, but nonetheless to have the money we need to fund our homes. That means to balance the account overall, we have made savings of just under £5 million, 4,898,000. We've got some increased income from rents, from the number of individual charges that people have, that I'll come back onto, as well as what we expect to collect from the contribution that leaseholders make of £7 million, which allows us to have an extra commitment of £12 million overall to the account. On rents, I guess the one other thing I would say is because we've had this reduction, although rents are going up this year, they're broadly the same as they were 4 years ago when we previously, before we had the rent reduction. What that rent means in practice for a 2-bedroom flat is an increase of £2.67 a week, from £98 a week and £98.97 to £101.64. So it's significant over the course of a year, particularly people on very low incomes. If you're on universal credit, for instance, £2.67 a week is not an insignificant amount of money by any measure, but it is what tenants have supported us to do this time round. There are a number of other charges that are charged against tenants, so things like estate cleaning, communal lighting, door entry systems, and on those we've looked to put them up broadly in line with the rents as well. And for our sheltered housing residents, this year we've also looked at the same increase for them, but actually we've looked at perhaps reviewing that, the broader arrangements there over the coming years, Important to say, sheltered housing residents receive not just obviously a landlord support, but sheltered support. There's been changes over time of how those costs are apportioned. If you go back some years, most of the support came from other funding streams, and as those other funding streams were cut away by government, supporting people, particularly landlords across the country, put more support into the rental element in ways that they were allowed to. But we need to look again at how we charge for all of those things again and do a proper consultation over that over the coming year. We didn't want to make any changes without consulting. So to then jump on to the actual, what does it mean in terms of expenditure changes? So you'll see at the back you've got some tables. And I won't go through them all because there's lots of lines here, so I'll just pick out the ones, the main ones. So in terms of budget, if you're on the Appendix B, the one that goes across that this way, first of those tables, you'll see that a big chunk of the money is going into just the inflationary uplift, as you'd expect across the piece. We're putting in an additional, if you look at the bottom line, the biggest one, £7 million into asset management, £7.1 million. I have somewhere a slight breakdown of that, but we're done with it. So that will allow us to put in an extra £3 million into heating maintenance, an extra 1.5 million into internal repairs maintenance, an extra 1.4 million into communal repairs maintenance. And they're the key things that residents want more money spent on. It's important to say this is all the revenue funding. Capital funding is separately, so money to renew district heating systems, for example, wouldn't sit in this budget, that sits in the capital side. Then the other lines you'll see on here, we've got an additional investment of £970,000 in our Great Estates programmes. This is a programme to bring up the quality of our estates. We managed to find a similar amount of money this year by looking at bits of underspend in current budgets, but this puts it into the baseline budget and allows us to have a recurring funding stream that will allow us to continue to fund Great Estates work across the patch. And then we have got an additional revenue contribution to the Quality Homes Improvement Programme. So in order to create a capital fund for our council homes, we have to move money across from revenue to capital. We are increasing the amount we're moving across from revenue to capital by just short of £1 million there in this budget. I will then skip on to table D, which is probably the more interesting one. I'm obviously happy to come back to questions on the other lines. And just pick up a couple of things here. So on the second line there, you've got, that's 302, it talks about bad debts and arrears write-offs, rebasing the budget. So this is just saying that actually over recent years we haven't had to write off as many bad debts. So we feel that we can be confident that we can reduce that budget in order to spend less on that, as we haven't recently. Estate management operational budgets. This is a whole set of smaller items where the service have gone line by line through the service and looked, actually we can spend a little bit less on training, a little bit less on promotional materials, etc. And they've really very systematically gone through their whole service budget. And hostels provision I wanted to particularly highlight. So whilst there's a saving here of 120,000 on hostels, actually this is about a service improvement programme where they're looking at moving from a model where people have a whole range of individuals supporting them in a service to each having an individual support worker. The service are very confident that the service change will lead to a better service, in fact. There won't be any redundancies as a result. They'll move people around within the service, but actually, as a result, they'll be spending less on the service as they move through it. And then the last one I'll highlight as well, as it's a large amount of money. So the 400,000 here is where we're expecting, just because of the programming of works, to have more income coming in from the contribution that leaseholders are making. So just when we've looked at the programme for next year, the number of jobs being done, the number of leaseholder properties, the work that's likely to happen, we think there'll be about £4 million more of income. Obviously that will then disappear somewhere else as expenditure on that work. I'm happy to answer.
That's great, thank you very much. And I welcome Councillor MacDonald. sorry, I gave you a point. Yes, thanks very much. One question, I know Councillor Buck had a question from the previous meeting, but before we answer that question, just on it's crystal ball gazing again, I'm afraid, Duncan. But in terms of new government, we haven't had any indication as yet as to what they intend to do going forward in relation to rent policy. At the moment, we've got CPI +1. Do we know, or any indication how long that's going to continue, or whether they're looking to review that at some stage?
No, Duncan's got anything to add to this. I mean, the industry hope is that that will continue. There are rumours that they may not. I've heard that as little as that. I don't know if you...
No news. Clearly the period of 1% year-on-year reduction was, as Kieran set out, I think, costing this council a lot of money, not least by way of the amount of reinvestment we could put back into housing stock. £800 million over the life of the business plan is a lot of money and a lot of homes. But as at today, CPI +1 reinstated. Southwark still, I think, has the 7th lowest rent levels in London boroughs, so we're still very much at the low end of the rent spectrum. We have a lot of new homes to build, which will create a new rent income, but there's no intelligence here, I'm afraid, on where government are going on this. But one thing I would beg for is that they don't take us back to a year-on-year reduction. This is just counterintuitive.
No, I totally agree with you. So in terms of what we've lost, how long will it take us to catch up, recoup what we've lost?
Well, it depends what you mean by what we've lost. We are now back, as a result of the change, we will be back to the short-term change, broadly back where we were in 2015-16. The rent will be at the same place then. Although that's not in real terms, actually, that's in numerical terms. To get back in real terms, you're probably talking about another 2 years to get back to where we were in real terms. And then we obviously have to catch up again.
In terms of rent, that's probably about right, to get back
to where we would have been, but in terms of the lost £800 million, we never get that back unless we give more flexibility around housing rents. It's just a compounded loss of revenue over a 30-year period that you never get back. If we have more flexibility on rents going forward, that's helpful, but then there are clearly difficult choices to make around above inflation increases, and that's the only way you can get back the equilibrium. And I'm not sure where the administration will be on that, and indeed the tenants who go through a great deal of consultation in terms of getting to this budget.
Anna? I appreciate what you're saying. Councillor Buck.
Thanks. Yeah, so just from my question on Monday, Kieran, and I appreciate you saying in the report that some of the things that I was raising would be potential capital funding. I appreciate as well Duncan grabbed me in one of the breaks on Monday and explained kind of the situation with potential funds for district heating and the system, the situation that we're in with district heating. But the first point I would make is that I think it will be music to the ears of residents that an additional £7 million is being put into district heating maintenance and repair, and we cannot scream that loud enough from the rooftops that is an investment that we're making.
Just to be clear, £7 million into all of the capital expenditure. Sorry, not capital expenditure. Asset maintenance, £3 million.
£3 million, okay.
Into district.
That's still fantastic. But the question that I had specifically from Monday was around any potential growth in borrowing costs as a result of large-scale district heating replacement or repair that we may have to take, which I would presume would go against the housing revenue account, but could potentially have a revenue impact in the future.
Duncan will come back with the detail. Obviously, the bit of context, you might have already heard this, but for everyone's benefit, we are doing a piece of work now as a council to look at our long-term strategy for district heating. That's absolutely fundamentally looking at what do we need to invest to get all of our systems up to a place where they're affordable, reliable and sustainable for our residents. And part of that is looking at the capital expenditure that we need to do that. Officers are beavering away now and looking at how we can do that. Our aim is to bring something to, I think, March Cabinet now on where that's got to, or maybe the one afterwards. But I will let Duncan answer the question about the finances.
I think it will be March Cabinet, but I think it will then go on way beyond that. What we have in the capital programme for district heating at the moment is £350 million over the next 10 years. We know we need to do a lot of replacements. What we don't quite know at the moment is in what order and what those replacements will look like, particularly as we move into the carbon reduction arena as well. So my anticipation is that it'll take longer to get £350 million out of the door. That will be primarily borrowing, because these are major, I say small scale, medium scale projects in their own right. The impact of that borrowing is actually in the second section of, is in the region at the moment of about £33 million a year is what we pay on our housing debt. As we deal with the district heating issues and with new build, that is a number that will progressively grow over the next 10, 30 years. One thing I would say, however, is that as our debt grows, we're bound by something called a prudential code. And the prudential code makes us think quite seriously about what we're able to borrow. And the thing about borrowing costs is you've got interest and principal repayments on that debt, just like your mortgage. In the housing revenue account, we must pay the interest, but we have flexibility over principal repayments, and that's a differential between the HRA and the general fund. And that's how social housing was created in the UK, actually. That's why we have council housing. It was established because you paid interest on debt but didn't repay principal. So that line in this budget over the next 10 years will increase significantly. And what we do have is the reassurance that as we provide better and indeed new homes, we have a rental income that will actually offset that, if that's...
Yeah, it does, but it does lead very neatly into a supplemental question which I had, which was specifically about that level of commitment to district heating repair or replacement. Do you think, Duncan and Kieran, that could potentially have an impact on the delivery of our Future Council Homes programme, which in terms of the HRA and servicing interest will have an accumulative effect on the revenue that we'll be able to raise? Because I would imagine in terms of the long-term plan, it's baked in that delivery of Future Council Housing, which obviously then leads to funds into the HRA. And so if we did have to borrow money to replace district heating, which I think anybody who represents a ward with district heating estates on it knows that that is an essential thing, will that have an accumulative effect on the homes that we'll be able to deliver and therefore the overall financial package as a whole?
Potentially, absolutely, yes. The ways that we can fund building new homes are borrowing, government grant, right to buy receipts, sales, Section 106, you know, a few small numbers of ways in. So unless some of those other things go up, Section 106 is probably going to come down. But so unless some of the others go up, then actually yes, it'll put tension on between what it is we can afford to buy. We've got, for the moment, we've got our plan set out up until, where are we going?
Capital programme, 10 years.
The next 10 years.
Whenever that is.
Yeah, 10 years. So it would be towards the end of the programme that becomes a difficulty. It won't stop us doing what we're trying to do over the next few years. But yes, it will cause a trade-off. Unless, I hope, we have a government that invests in council housing. In case it may not be a problem at all.
Yes, well, we all hope for that. Councillor Edwards.
Two very quick ones from me. Again on the district heating. Yes, the £3 million is very welcome. I think on the response, you know, some of the evidence we've heard in the Scrutiny Commission about that particular issue. There's two bits of that work. There's the longer term work which you've gone over, and also the kind of response now when we've got problems happening. Could you give us a little bit more detail on how that £3 million is intended to be spent? Or, you know, what kind of stuff? Do you want to answer that one first?
I think the straight answer is I'd have to come back to you on the detail, well, which I'm very happy to do, but I'd have to come back.
That would be really, really helpful. And the second one is, in the reference you made in your opening remarks about the improvement around bad debt and not having to write off less debt, have you got any idea what's lying behind that improvement in the situation? Is it something that the council's doing, or is this something that's happening more generally, which we don't have any control over?
I think, as for all of our debt recovery services, the local economy is relatively buoyant at the moment, and that kind of subscribes to a lot of other things that we were saying on Monday about the fact that we're generating a lot of local resources, and this is all fantastic until the economy turns the other way. So if there's a single reason, I would say the economy is doing well, employment is at high levels. I think Southwark has done an awful lot to mitigate the damage of universal credit on the local economy and people's ability to pay. But to what extent we can do that forever, I don't know. But and of course the team is fantastic, providing the service that goes out to find ways of collecting the money. Can I just make another point going back to district heating as well? I mean, borrowing will have to be the solution to the size of the district heating issue that we have. We're the third biggest social landlord in the country. We have an old estate, relatively, and it needs to be replaced. And so therefore there is nowhere else to go other than borrowing. So what we do need is certainly low government interest rates from PWLB for borrowing, and we discussed, I think, on Monday the damage caused by a 1% increase irrationally on that source, and the same will apply to new build as well. But we also need to look for government carbon investment or low carbon investment. We kind of know from experience that whatever we do today will be out of date tomorrow. So in terms of this whole programming and planning for a district heating system which is using zero carbon solutions, it's a really tricky one, and Southwark being the size that it is from a housing point of view is particularly taxing, but it will be a borrowing solution unless grant is forthcoming, which one could argue it should be.
I'm sorry, just not to want to labour the point, but just to add to that, the other thing that's really important to say is the nature of our stock is those with district heating systems are mostly of a similar age. So whilst a district heating system should last about 25 to 30 years, and we've made many of ours last a bit longer than that, they're all coming up to the end of their life at the same time. And of course we install new systems and then they should last for another 30 years, maybe longer with modern systems. And on one point to add on the investment, whilst absolutely we want to invest in low and zero carbon energy sources, some of the investment it sort of sits alongside that, so that new pipe work, new radiators in buildings, they can be connected to any energy source. They can be much more energy efficient versions of those things. That's an investment that lasts, and you can plug in different energy sources over time.
Great, thank you. Councillor Lisa.
Thank you, Kieran. My question is to table Appendix C, concerned that if you look on the right, at equalities analysis information, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of the categories that are going to may disproportionately impact people on low income. For example, the homeowner service charges. I know that a lot of homeowners and leaseholders are always earwigging with me and saying we're seen as a cash cow. Have you got any specific schemes? Because I know there's the schemes to help people on universal credit or people on low income if they're tenants, but have you got any specific schemes to help maybe leaseholders or homeowners, because obviously the service charges go up every year. That's besides everything else they're paying as well. And I think sometimes they tend to be forgotten that, oh, here's just another section 20 notice or whatever, and that's it.
So we're always very conscious of the difficulty for leaseholders of the charges that they face. Important to say that what we charge them is just the cost of the service they receive. So it's the cost of the maintenance of their home and their estate. It's the cost of the major works that we do, and we charge that is all we charge for, plus a administration fee, which only covers our administration, in fact, just about. In terms of helping people with that, then our approach has been to support them with payment over time. So we offer a full range of payment options to people, much more than I think almost any other landlord of any kind, including an interest-free payments for people that allow them to extend the payments over longer periods. I appreciate it still makes it very difficult for some leaseholders in extreme circumstances where people absolutely can't pay. We also offer them the opportunity to, and I forget the exact phrase for this, but effectively use the security of their home to pay and only have to pay the money once they've moved out or passed away. So we offer every opportunity we can to support, and we offer independent support and advice for people to help them choose the right options. So we have our home ownership service that sort of sits alongside the rest of the services to provide in the council, but independent from the service support, from the asset management team support, and then we also fund citizens advice as well to provide truly independent advice for them. But it is important to say the actual nature of what people have to pay is determined by the lease and set out in the leases, and that's not something we can change simply.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Salmon, please.
Thank you, Chair. In the excitement last night, I may have misheard this, so forgive me if I did. The 200,000 for the traders at the Elephant and Castle, did I hear someone say that came out of the HRA, or am I wrong about that? It was quite an excitable meeting, and I may have misheard.
No, so the 200,000 is, it's not my portfolio, but I think it's New Homes Bonus, which is money that council receives for new homes work. I think what was referred to in council assembly last night is that the properties in the bottom of Perinet House that are now Elephant Arcade, the properties themselves sit within the housing revenue account. So the rent received from those properties will be paid into the housing revenue account.
My apologies. There was a lot of noise.
There was at times, but certainly was.
Thank you.
Yes, coming from one side in particular, but anyway.
Just like that.
Councillor Ali.
Hello. So I've had a bee in my bonnet since I became a councillor about poor quality builds, and I may have asked a question in an interview previously about actually what does that do to your maintenance line item in terms of if you are receiving new build that is poor quality. So I think the question that I'm asking here is, have you seen any change in, now that you're getting new homes starting to come through, are you seeing any change in the quality and an increase in maintenance demands from that stream? And is that covered here is one part of the question. And the other part is major works again. I mean, Arnold Estate, after 3 years, we've had things painted 3 times, things replaced 7 times, and there's queries about whether we're paying for it or not paying for it. So actually, I just wanted to understand what that situation was, and are we really paying for things that we shouldn't be paying for, effectively?
So on new builds, I'm fairly confident that we haven't seen an increase, that the costs of repairs on our new builds are lower than the costs on our existing stock. Obviously, they have a repairs liability period that goes back, that's usually about a year, I think, if I'm correct, from the completion date. So anything within that period should go back to the contractor. But I can certainly go back and ask if we can do a bit more analysis on that. Obviously, we want our new homes to be quality homes that cost the council minimum amounts of money over the long term, so we will keep an eye on that, and if we haven't got any that are not, then we want to review that and the contractors as well. In terms of major works, I think it's fair to say there has been a real issue in the construction industry in Britain for a long time, and Southwark has suffered from some poor quality works on some of our estates. I've certainly seen some of it firsthand in the past. I think we're in a much better place now than we've been ever before. I think the quality of work being done now is good when I go around and visit sites, which I often do. I think the industry, we are clear about what we want from the industry. We are about to refresh our whole asset management strategy, and as part of that we'll be looking at the big providers. So most of our major works are delivered through partnering contracts. Those contracts have strengths in that you avoid lots of procurement cost as a result of it. But actually at the moment We think there probably is a better way of having a bit more opportunity to use different contractors on different sites so that we can move away from any we have concerns about and move towards any that are better and keep the quality and value up. So we will review that again this time round over the course of the asset management strategy will come back in the summer when we look through that and we do our re-procurement. But I think we're getting to a place where the quality is pretty good. Last time I was up on the Tustin Towers when they were looking there, at some really well installed kitchen and bathrooms, lots of very happy residents. Things had gone well, and we just need to keep making sure quality stays high. And the last thing I'll say on this, one of the things that is most important in doing that for us is that we are now in a place where we are much more consistent in having resident project groups when works are done. We're just refreshing our putting resident first policy to make that even more clearer that those groups should be in place before the work starts, before you get to Section 20 notice process. You should be talking to residents and setting them up so residents can have absolute oversight of what's in the specification, what gets done, and is it quality and has it been done to standard.
Thank you. And just as very, very quickly, I don't understand line 306, but you don't need to explain it now. I can come and sit with you afterwards. But just to hammer home that point about leaseholder charges, I've got examples of where it feels like major works are happening on a far too regular a basis. And the bills that are coming through, people are in just perpetual debt. So Devon Mansions being an example of that. I appreciate the ageing stock comment, but I just feel like we're getting to a point now where if contractors have made mistakes, then leaseholders are paying the price for it. Or if something else needs to be done because someone didn't plan it properly, leaseholders are paying the price. So again, it's just trying to understand, because you said something about that 4 million was actually income from lease, the work, the charge out. So yeah, it's just trying to understand that piece. Anyway.
Thank you. Councillor Cheery. My mistake. Councillor Werner.
My question is
Thank you very much. Councillor MacDonald.
question has so I know you were at a meeting at the Brandon with the leaseholders there, and I guess it's just a question about obviously there's no increase to district heating and hot water charges, but I think sometimes there's a concern that if temporary boilers are put in, for example, then a charge goes in later, and it's just what kind of reassurances you can offer to people that doesn't happen, and that when it says no increase, it doesn't. And then I was just interested in terms of the sheltered housing service charges. I know in some of the consultation notes it said, some people said, do you have enough consultation with sheltered housing, actually directly with sheltered housing facilities as well? Would be my two questions.
So on in district heating for leaseholders, so leaseholders end up broadly paying three costs for their district heating. They pay the cost of the heat and the fuel. Last year, the cost of gas went up nationally to all some major suppliers at 24%. So there was quite a significant increase in that, although it's a small element of the total cost people are paying. There's a cost for maintenance, and the cost there is the actual cost of maintenance. So we also do estimates at the beginning of the year, and at the end of the year people get a bill based on actually how much money have we spent on maintaining their district heating system and what's their proportion that they pay for it. And then there are major works costs where we do major works to replace pipe work, replace boilers, etc. For I think one of the things that's most challenging in the costs that go to leaseholders is, whereas if you owned your own home, you probably would replace your windows with a similar regularity to a council would. If you own your own home, you replace your single combi boiler. They last about 10 to 15 years on average, something like that. And the cost is £5,000 or so to do. If the council comes along and replaces the district heating system, the fact we've only done it once every 38 years, but you happen to be living in the home when it's replaced, means you get an enormous bill. And it's just a system that doesn't work very well for leaseholders, and was not designed to. The buildings that have those kinds of systems were not designed with leaseholders in mind. They were designed to with tenants in mind, and that's the thing we're working through. I mean, that's why we put in place all of the payment options we have. But to go back to your question, in terms of what they charge, we are back to they charge what's in their lease, and the lease says that they pay their contribution, their proportion. If there are 100 homes, they pay 100th of the cost of all the maintenance costs and the major works costs, plus the energy use. So sheltered housing, so officers this year were looking at making some more changes to sheltered housing. and I said that we need to do proper consultation around any changes that happen here. So this year we will be doing a full consultation with the people who live in sheltered housing, with a view to saying whether we do or don't make any more significant changes next year.
Thank you. Are there any more questions? No? It's just something I wanted to raise. There were, we had the item on the Kingswood estate the other month, and it was a bit disappointing to see the TV, another TV item about it, and I just wondered if you wanted to comment on that at this moment in time.
I think this is a difficult one. So we've had a couple of stories picked up on the Kingswood, and I think there's a more general story about the Kingswood that you've heard. There is a need to invest in the blocks, which we've all agreed. We've put aside money and identified them within the Quality Homes Improvement Programme. There's a whole range of work that needs doing there, including to identify damp. And one of the solutions to the damp that officers identified was to fit external wall insulation. Some of the residents, not all residents, are sceptical about that. So we've now appointed an independent surveyor that we gave some options to the residents. They went through the appointment process and appointed one. They're producing a report that will come back to, I think in about a month's time now, to say, is it the right solution for the estate, and if it's not, what might be a better solution on damp. So that's the broader point. There were a couple of cases that were particularly picked up last week in the news, both very difficult ones. So one was a case where a resident has reported that there are odours from drug use in their building coming through. They're concerned that's affecting their health. We've worked with the police on that. The police have been to the properties around the block, done a full inspection, so have our officers. We've not found any evidence of that yet. If we do, we'll continue to work with them. The second was a gentleman who's living in a home which absolutely has real damp problems. Unfortunately, up to now, he's not allowed us to have access to do any work to his home. So we will continue to offer that access, but we're not being given it at the moment.
Thanks for that. We might revisit that in the future ourselves. Okay, thanks again for coming this evening, Kieran. We appreciate your fulsome response to all our questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Don't go anywhere, Duncan. You're in the hot seat tonight. Do you want to come up with him, Rob? Just give him some moral support.
It's nice to have somebody who knows what they're talking about.
Good, thank you very much. Okay, so we're going to move on to item 6 now. Formulation of recommendations to Cabinet on the policy resources strategy. Now, besides the change to the appendices, is there anything else different in this document from when we received it on Monday? No? Good, just double checking. I don't want to go off on a loose tangent. Now, everybody's been given this extra paper from Everton in terms of the questions that members raised. Just to get some structure around this, could we follow Everton's notes? Would you think that would be better? You have? No, he hasn't got one here. Okay. So, are we okay? Okay, so we got. Okay, so we've got just over 4 pages, and then there's some gaps, but Everton's got his rough notes on the other 3 at the end. Okay, so if we can go through it page by page, is that all right for everybody? Okay, so okay, I don't think my point is part of that, so I don't think we need to include that. Alternative forms of income generation. Sorry, Duncan. Yeah.
Sorry, just by giving a little more structure as well. We clearly have a report to submit to Cabinet next Tuesday. Yes. The focus of that will be the recommendations coming out of OSC. Otherwise, I think we're pretty much as per programme. So it will then clearly be an issue for Cabinet to agree or otherwise the recommendations of OSC. In the meantime, we have listened to some of the non-contentious stuff that came out of Cabinet, out of OSC on Monday. So we're adapting the report to include some of that background information that was mentioned a few times. So that will be a change in the draft report next week. But the focus for Tuesday, I think, will be what your recommendations are and Cabinet's acceptance or otherwise to those.
Fine. Well, I mean, just chip in if you've already, if you're already doing it. I mean, obviously there's some presentational things. We'll go through those as we progress. Humera, was there anything on that income generation that you wanted?
So I think the specific thing is if we've got this 18 million black hole which may or may not get filled by the DFE and our reserves are 21 million, then surely something else needs to be put in place now to think about alternative means to generate income for next year, if I've understood correctly. I'm seeing a hovering of
It was a chair. If you can tell me to shut up if I'm barking up the wrong tree here. But if we go through every line of these notes, we're gonna repeat the debates that we had the other day. I mean, I think you're right to give it structure and use this as our guide. But are we going to go through every single line of it? Because we've started at the top there.
Well,
I don't intend to start backwards or in the middle. So I mean, the thing is, this is here as an aid memoir. I mean, obviously, if people have got specific recommendations they wish to put forward, then by all means, please put those forward. But I just the only reason I'm going through this is because I want to make sure we don't miss anything. I'm not saying that we have to talk about everything which is written here. But I mean, unless somebody else can come up with I don't know how else to manage it, to be perfectly frank.
The only suggestion would be we all, I think, whilst we were having the session the other day, were making notes, typed out recommendations. If we just went round each member of the committee and asked for recommendations, that might be one other way of doing it.
Well, we could do, but I mean, I'd have to go backwards and forwards in my own notes, and that would probably take me the best part of half an hour. So
maybe there's a way between the two that we could just take. Obviously, this is for Vicky for overall budget stuff, and just take each cabinet member if people have got specific recommendations for each area. But I mean, I think it's just not going through each line, but just doing it as a general discussion for each cabinet.
well, if I may, I think obviously there was the stuff at the beginning, which is the first page about the general report, and then everything else is specific to each cabinet member. Yes. So if we just get the general stuff out the way first of all, including the presentational stuff, then we can get onto the nitty gritty of each cabinet member. I think that's probably the best way to proceed. Yeah. Okay. Right. Okay. I forgot where we were now.
No, I was halfway through a sentence.
Yes,
Sorry.
yes.
I get what you're saying. I'm not trying to rehash an argument. I'm just saying that actually there's something, and I'm not going to be prescriptive on what that thing is, about whether you need to find a resource or somebody to be looking at other income generation ideas, so that we're not in that position in 12 months' time, because surely this will be in the same position again in 12 months' time, and then we won't have those reserves unless you know something that I don't about the DFE paying up.
So I guess the recommendation from the committee is to the cabinet to investigate further income streams. That's what you're getting at? Income generation schemes. Yeah. Yeah.
Everyone's like shaking their head no. So that's
I mean, that's to me that sounds far too general for a recommendation.
If you want me to say, like, go and find a person to go and work
No. I just think if we're making recommendations about things that we specifically think should be changed or modified or nuanced in the budget as it exists. Saying the cabinet should go off and investigate, they're not going to be able to do that by the cabinet.
Well, hold on. Let me deal with this. We're talking about the general part of the budget, okay? So I think it's fair for members to make some general observations, which aren't necessarily to do with the detail and body of this particular budget, or indeed this year's budget per se, but something perhaps that the cabinet may consider for the future. So, as I say, let's just stick to the general part. It's not. I presume the point you're trying to make is there's something for the cabinet to consider over, for the future, isn't it?
It's not just a general consider. No, they're not going to do it by next Tuesday. That's not, and find all the answers, the money by next Tuesday. But to make sure that they implement something, they might need to put a little bit of money aside now, so that they can make sure that they do that work in the year, so that we're not in the same position in the next year. That's all I'm saying. So whether that is a little money for a resource, or getting a consultant or whatever.
Well, I think it's prudent financial management, isn't it? At the end of the day, but I think what you're trying to get at is to look to generate different forms of income. Is that's what you?
Beyond what we're already
Yeah.
Not
Chair, if I may, I mean the point that stood out for me in Monday's meeting was when Councillor Ali asked Duncan and Councillor Mills if there was any innovative or creative revenue streams that the council had put into this budget. And to be fair to Councillor Ali and Councillor Mills and Duncan, they came back and they said, well, we have revenue raising ideas, but there's nothing particularly innovative or new that we could name off the top of our heads. That stood out as a moment for me. And I think that given the potential scale of financial challenge that the council will be facing in the next 5 years, that is a situation which has to change. And as a general recommendation from this overview and scrutiny committee, that more thought and consideration for new and innovative ways for the organisation to make funds should be something that we should be putting down.
The way this is not going to be done for the 2021 budget. I think everyone's agreed with that. So, by way of a recommendation, the next budget report and the next policy and resources strategy report will be going to Cabinet in the spring, the early summer, with hopefully a view on what resources are available beyond then. What you might like to be recommending is something that says that report includes some new proposals around the future strategy of the council for income generation, or I have to say these are not going to be big numbers. Short of significant commercial investment in property, these are going to be small numbers. They're not going to solve, for example, an £80 million problem. But that could be the place for us to make a recommendation that comes back with some more thoughts as we go into that 21, 22 and beyond round in the face of a new spending review and formula funding arrangements.
That's a sensible way of progressing it.
Yeah, although but I do think there is I think we have to be quite specific about what we mean about innovative income generation, because I think it's doing us probably a slight disservice to some of the conversations that have been had about how we look at this. I'm pretty sure that when cabinet members are looking at this, they are thinking about innovative ways, and people just might have different definitions of what innovative is. And and I think, to be fair, you're right that there weren't really specific things, but it's quite a kind of, it's on your own judgment about what you think is innovative or not. So I just want to be sure that we're not kind of actually putting something down that is suggesting that we haven't looked at this already, and you will have more insight into some of those conversations. But if anyone wants to specify a bit more what innovative means, are you talking more public-private partnerships, for example? Fine, but I just think innovative is a bit of a difficult word to have.
It was the cabinet members themselves that said innovative.
But I think, and if I remember rightly, Councillor Mills did point to some, I can't remember exactly what it was, but she said you could call this an innovative approach, for example, of income generation. So I just do think there are different definitions of it. That's all I'm saying, that it's maybe the wording. And people might have in their heads what they think that is that would make it a bit more specific. But
Well, I mean, to be fair, the word on paper is alternative, it's not innovative. So there could be existing, I don't know. So it doesn't have to be new.
Sorry, Chair, I think we're just getting into semantics.
Well, I think this is a needless debate, to be perfectly frank. And I think you made the point, and Duncan's responded, and I think that's the best way forward.
I just want to make a suggestion, if you want to be really specific, actually say that by the next budget round in a year's time, you get, I don't know, 5-10% of an officer's time to work with the cabinet to draft innovative alternatives ways of income generation, because at least this time next year somebody may have been tasked to actually brought forth some ideas, rather than we just talk about it in a broad sense and nothing will happen. Because that can be really, if you want it to be really specific, so at least in that way you could say you can allocate, I don't know, 20,000 whatever, and be really specific so that work does happen, that thinking does happen, so somebody is supporting cabinet members to do that. Because at the moment it's just as and when, and people might have done a little bit of that, and there's no joined up thinking of how we're going to do it.
I don't think anyone should be under any illusions that officers are not constantly thinking about new ways of generating income. I think earmarking people's time specifically to it is going down a line that we've frankly been down before. We'll go there again, but I think that's a matter for the Chief Executive and the Chief Officer team to actually allocate those resources accordingly. I think from an OSC point of view and from a Cabinet point of view, what you're looking for is proposals for income generation that you may choose to accept or you may choose to reject. But I have to put you on warning again, you'll get a lot of proposals that you will not want to accept, and that will take a lot of officer time to generate. That's not to say we shouldn't do that, because our job is to provide you guys and gals with options of different ways of generating resource, but
at least then. Because if not, what will happen is everybody will think it's their responsibility, no one will take the responsibility, and it will just go around and we'll talk about it with whoever is on OSC next year, and then people get frustrated and think we discussed it in 2020, what's happened now?
I think all we're calling for is the Cabinet to look broader than just charges in terms of income generation. That's the gist of what Councillor Ali was saying. And I don't think there's anything wrong in recommending that to the Cabinet. I mean, I'm sure that they do, and I'm sure they'll find some, that won't be politically palatable, but that's for the Cabinet to decide. It's all we can do is just make a recommendation for them to consider other forms.
Chair, would it be useful at this point to suggest something which we think could be a practical example of this as an avenue to explore? Something that I've mentioned to colleagues before as an example of potential strategic economic strength of Southwark, which I feel was something that our council is not involved in exploiting, is the absolutely enormous tourist industry that we have in Southwark as its heart of London, and the huge heritage tourism industry that we have in the borough. And if we think about how the council is strategically involved in that industry, we are not in any way at all involved in that industry. If you were to look at a town like Durham or a city like Norwich, where I grew up, the council is strategically involved in the tourist industry. They own the cafe at Norwich Castle, and that cafe brings in hundreds of thousands of pounds every year to the council, I would assume. I don't know the figures. But if we're thinking about strategic ways the council can advance its income generation, first point of call for me would be the 2 miles from Blackfriars to London Bridge. Why do we not own a cafe somewhere along the river there? Just as an example. But if we're thinking about new and innovative ways to raise revenue, that would be a place for me to start. And if we wanted to put that down as an example for people to explore, I would be very happy to move that.
Why not? Councillor Chamberlain.
I just would like to second the point that Councillor Buck made. I think that's a very clever idea, and in fact, it's something that was put forward in the budget last year, was the idea of having a levy on tourists that are staying in hotels in the borough. And actually, that is one way that we can start capitalising the tourist industry that exists in this borough. For the benefit of, in that instance, it was about having a rough sleeping hub. I think we absolutely can be making a lot more of that this whole sector that exists that we're not currently doing. I actually wanted to flag up 2 other areas of sort of innovative revenue generation that we discussed and that came about on Monday. One was a question that I asked around the capacity here at Tudor Street. It was actually conceded that there is a lot of capacity that we are not currently utilising here, and maybe that is something that we could be looking more actively to try and lease to sympathetic public sector or charitable organisations that share our values. Because as we know, this is Zone 1 prime real estate. Whatever the status of the commercial sector at the moment, there is still a real demand for it in somewhere as attractive as this. And then the other one was about asking those larger private developers that we have quite an abundance of in Southwark, whether or not they could be contributing more directly towards the costs of our planning and regeneration departments. And that again was considered that there is capacity, or there is opportunities for us to be asking more from private developers. And we, I feel that there are two examples that just came out from the discussion, the debate on Monday, that we absolutely could be putting forward as recommendations.
I think those last two contributions take us to a much better place, because I think getting specific guidance to the Cabinet about the kind of things we're looking to is where what we shouldn't do is make a recommendation where we say the Cabinet should look innovatively at new income streams. I don't think that would be a good idea, mainly for we want to make specific recommendations that nudge, push, however you want to put it, the Cabinet in a particular direction. Those last two contributions do that, but just saying generally look innovative, the Cabinet is already doing that, but nudging them in a particular direction would be a good idea. So if we can come up with a wording that captures the essence of that kind of nudge, then I think we're in a much better place.
So it's up to you to square the circle there, Duncan.
So we'll work with Everton and yourself, Chair, in the morning to work out a way of getting some impetus behind Cabinet, behind income generation, with the examples of tourism, planning, and I've forgotten the third one. And office accommodation as examples, and I agree they're very helpful guides.
Excellent, we got that. Good. Okay, I don't think there's anything Brexit-wise we need to say. Equalities, is there anything we need to say on equalities? Yes.
Well, it's kind of equalities, but I think the sustainability impact of the budget, and I don't know what is feasible. We did make this recommendation last year and didn't see anything happen. So it is, can we put in a recommendation? You'll have to tell us what is possible in the framing, but at least by next year, would it be possible for to provide an assessment of the sustainability impact of the budget, given that we have declared a climate emergency? So that would be, I guess it's kind of an ESG assessment rather than just equality.
Just anticipating our theme that will run through these papers, there is something that you will want to recommend, I think, which is probably what you just described actually, which is for future year budgets, there needs to be, in addition to an equalities impact assessment, there needs to be a carbon impact assessment. That's probably the wrong word, actually. It's sustainability impact assessment, but that's not unreasonable. It's where many other councils across the country are going. I don't think we're there this year, and I don't think we're going to get there this year, but beyond that point it seems entirely reasonable, and I'm sure Cabinet will be very receptive to that.
Sounds very innovative. Yes, thank you.
Chair, I've got a possible recommendation around equalities. So this is proposal, with regard to the proposal to introduce parking charges for leisure centres, the Cabinet should guarantee that new charges will not apply to leisure centre users who are registered disabled. The Cabinet member did say, kind of indicate that was their thinking, but I think it would be good for us to kind of draw a line, or encourage the Cabinet to draw a line on that area.
Yep. I guess parking in the appropriate places as well. But okay. Was there any more on equalities? Anybody wanted to say? No? Yes?
Just as Councillor MacDonald made the point that kind of last time round there's been a push that there are a lot of missing inequalities and analyses. I mean, that kind of feels like it's happened to a lesser extent this time, but it has happened again. So I mean, it feels like there needs to be some request there, to my mind, because it's a bit difficult to understand the importance of equalities issues if they're just down as not completed.
I don't think I'm disagreeing with you actually, Peter. Some are not completed because the details of the scheme are not yet in place to be able to complete them. So I think we lose something in the vocabulary and the language. But I think, again, a thematic point throughout Monday was around equalities assessments. And I don't think it would be unreasonable for us to ask Cabinet, to ask chief officers to revisit those assessments before Council Assembly in February, just to ensure that they're complete and accurate and fully assessed. That work is kind of going on anyway, because it's kind of ongoing, but it was a theme on Monday, and it's an important one and probably worth just restating.
I totally agree with you. Councillor MacDonald?
So, well, it's just, will all of the equalities analysis be able to be done by then? Because I guess there's a thing about how you assess the ongoing equalities impact of some of the measures, and is it, and maybe, sorry, I probably should ask this, but is it an annual assessment of that, or is there a recommendation around a 6-monthly review of the equalities impact of everything?
From an officer's point of view, equalities is in the mind all the time. It's part of your day job, really. Just consider probably the lightest equalities impact in this budget is the 7.3 million worth of new money going into social care. Now, one would hope the equalities impact of that is going to be really extremely positive. It's an opportunity, admittedly, the government have given us, but it's something that's just too soon for the budget process. There's this kind of dilemma between setting a budget at Council Assembly on February the 26th and getting on and doing it. And there are some very small items where you're actually groping to find equalities issues. And there are the really, really big ones, which are really very, very difficult to describe. So businesses, as usual, it's ingrained in the mind of the organisation. It's in the fairer future thoughts that run through everything we do now. So it's just trying to get the integration between a process, which is a budget, and that kind of behavioural kind of stuff, and it's quite hard. Asking Cabinet to just reassess and review and to keep working on, I think, is a really important message, and it's one that we get from Cabinet all the time. I'm not sure that was helpful.
Well, no, I think so. It would be useful to include a recommendation that says to provide, obviously, request Cabinet to continually review the impact assessment and to perhaps publish a mid-term assessment of the budgetary measures on equalities. Is that one?
I'd go further than that. I'd say quarterly, to be honest.
Okay.
Could I add that could be integrated with performance management reports, which, and I think it's in those as well, but probably can do more.
Yeah, and I think it would just get slightly, it's always there, but it's quite hard to find.
I know, I'm
sympathetic.
sympathetic.
Great. You're taking a note of all these recommendations, aren't you?
Trying to do a triangulation.
Good, okay. Okay, let's move on to, yes, the tables, and yeah, I raised the point about the historical trends.
Sorry,
Oh, sorry.
Before you get there, it ties a bit to what Alice was saying, but just each year, and especially this year when we're working through the efficiencies and some of the savings, there's just a concern point about what might happen next, and I wondered if we might make a suggestion that rather than a kind of blanket, I'll check the effect of everything, like a specific kind of monitoring list of lines that we were especially concerned about the potential effects of planned efficiency savings.
Do you mean more generally than an equalities impact?
Well, yes, as in, so it may not just be an equalities issue, it may just be like a service quality one. So for example, if it was kind of on the noise related one that we're saying that would be reducing the spread of hours and having more people on for a certain time, then it's like we might identify, okay, there were 4 where we were particularly concerned about the potential effects on service quality. so it's where equalities are similar, and you might just identify what that list is so that you can actually come back on them at a certain point.
So I think what Peter's saying is that besides having this, it comes back to your point about the performance report. Besides having the assessment and monitoring of a qualities impact, also having a look at if there's any service, detrimental service impact because of the efficiencies that have been made. If there's any data or feedback to give that.
It's good to talk, isn't it? We have clearly our triennial reports to Cabinet about financial performance and capital programme. And think about capital programme, equalities impact, incredibly significant, but we probably don't cover it at the moment. So through capital and revenue monitoring reports and also through the performance monitoring reports, there is probably an opportunity to do something more hard-coded about what is the overall impact of this performance and this financial situation and this capital programme. So an OSC recommendation to Cabinet could be that there should be included within those reports a very specific piece about inequalities. I would probably be looking to the Strategic Director of Place and Wellbeing to design that, because it's in there at the moment, but it's a bit all over the place.
I think Peter was talking broader than that, Duncan.
Yeah, so I guess my point being that, say for example, I took a note of, sometimes it might be equality, so changes to HIV prevention for Black African communities, the thinking being that it's just inefficient, it's not going to have a negative service impact, but it actually might, and there's not, and having a kind of clear checkpoint that, there were X number of points where we were particularly concerned that there might be a service quality impact by the planned efficiency. I'm not quite sure how that would be captured as of now, or the changes to kind of waste and cleaning collection. So there might be specific points where we're concerned about the potential impact of planned efficiencies on service quality. So you might have kind of an overall performance review which would kind of tell you, generally speaking, how a function's going. But if there's a specific efficiency or related change that's been made, and you want to be clear on the effect of that efficiency going forward, that might be something we'd pick up.
I think we're getting out of my comfort zone here. What I think we're describing is a kind of a redefinition of how equalities works in the whole of the organisation. Actually, I mean, from a budget point of view,
I think you got the wrong end of the stick. To be fair, Duncan. Do you want to have a go?
Well, I just wonder if it might be more useful, because I think the specific examples are useful. So it might be more that take your example of it. Is it more about the cabinet members returning to OSC or providing the impact? If there's kind of 3 or 4 and care packages came up as well, it might just be worth as we go through. Actually, but it might not be a kind of risk one. It might be one for the individual cabinet members to, given that there might be an impact on service provision. Will the relevant cabinet members for this come and report back to us on the impact, something like that?
That's why it was out of your comfort zone.
I understand that.
Okay, great. All right. Is that okay? Right. Sorry. Go back to the presentational things. Yeah. So I requested about the historical trends, so that members could see, what's happened over time in terms of budgets, income, all that type of thing, and then to have the distinction between money which is passported and money that we actually have some influence and control about. Is that okay?
Yes.
And then I mentioned about having the comparator table over the council tax collection rate as well.
Yes.
Okay. Well, that's that done. Let's move on to Jasmine Ali's section then.
I
Yes. Well, If they're agreeing that they'll be done, then there's no need to put them in as recommendations, is there?
I think it's fine to have them as recommendations. On Tuesday, you will see a report that already goes some way to including those points. So that's an agreed, I think.
Okay. The first one I think was dealt with in question.
Yeah, I've just got a question. I think you missed business rates. I don't know whether it would be a recommendation.
Oh, sorry, did I?
Yeah, I don't know. So do we need to put measures in place to prepare for the potential reduction in business rates? Would that be a recommendation or not really? Be good to get your thoughts. So there's going to be a review that could have a massive impact on the finances. So, I don't know. Yeah.
Well, that would be something outside the budget, this year's budget.
Yeah, that's what I wanted
Yeah, Duncan.
I would claim there's a dialogue already in the report that kind of sets that out, but what Cabinet would probably be very grateful for is OSC's understanding that it really is an important and a big issue, and for the Cabinet to have OSC support to the risks that are related to that would be very helpful, and again I'm sure Cabinet would absolutely welcome that support.
Yeah, I think we can all agree to that.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you.
Chair, is Everton going to read back to us the recommendations at the end of the meeting? Is that how we're going to agree then?
Except for the ones where we've agreed that me, Everton and
yeah,
will go away.
Is that all right?
What would be desirable is taking notes of what you're all saying, but because it's going back and forth a little bit, what I was hoping to do is work with Duncan tomorrow morning and Councillor Wingfield, type something up that we can send you all to make sure there's consensus about what's being put forward.
Okay, so we'll circulate the recommendations, and then we can all, if there's any amendments, whatever, we can all chip in. If there's any disagreements, we'll have to meet again, because.
Or we could agree the wording tonight. That's the if there's various members that are making recommendations. Once we've kind of verbally agreed them, why don't we've all? I think most of us have got pen and paper or a tablet in front of us. Why doesn't that member write the specific wording of the recommendation, give it to Everton, and then at the end we can summarise them all? Because there's some we might not be able to agree, so they wouldn't go forward as recommendations. That's all.
Well, can somebody write mine for me, because I've got to chair the meeting?
You could say them out loud and perhaps everyone would write them down. I don't know. Yeah. Because if we send them round by email tomorrow morning and then we disagree, we're going to have a back and forth on email, and then we're not going to have recommendations, are we?
Okay, well, this is going to be a bit more laborious then. So let's go through it one by one. What have we got so far, Everton?
Chair, I was suggesting that the members come up with the wordings for the recommendation.
I know what you suggested. I was asking Everton what he'd had so far recorded.
I mean, to be honest, what would be helpful, but obviously it's for members to decide, is if we were able to tweak the recommendations and send them to you, it wouldn't be something going off scale. We've got it all recorded. It wouldn't be a loss. It's just sometimes when you're drafting it, we might come up with something that meets what you required, but it means just a little bit. It's just we might need a little bit of time to really think about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep. So we agree now? Yeah. Is that all right, everybody?
Yeah.
Thank you. Right. Where was I then? Yes, Councillor Alley. Yeah. Sorry. Jack, did you want to mention anything on the commission commitments?
In terms of the child mental health commitment and the message from Councillor Ali around 100% target of child mental health need, the only recommendation that I would make is that a small pot of money is put aside to look into costs that no recourse to public funds children may have in attending the new child mental health facility on Rye Lane, with also a policy recommendation that as we go forward with that programme, Councillor Ali should have a process of checking with schools, particularly around their service delivery, to ensure that children with no recourse to public funds have full access to that service.
Okay. Any discussion on Victoria? Sorry.
No, I was going to ask.
Oh, right, okay. Is everybody okay with that recommendation? Yeah?
Quite a long recommendation.
When you're short,
If we just wanted to cut it down to one, then would be that a small amount of money, I couldn't put a figure on it, is put aside to ensure that children with no recourse to public funds have access to the new child mental health facility on Rye Lane, whether that's us chipping in some money for a bus fare or something like that, families for no recourse to public funds. The other recommendation was more a policy one, which was that I wanted, because when I put the question around us meeting our 100% target and the budgetary commitments that we've made there, does that include children with no recourse to public funds? Councillor Ali and Councillor Mills' response was that we believe most of the funds will be delivered through schools, and it's their belief that schools are delivering those services to every pupil, including those with no recourse to public funds. The only other recommendation I would have is that could we ensure, as we deliver that programme, those school providers are delivering fully accessible service to children with no recourse to public funds. That was the only thing I would say. Whether that needs to be a recommendation for the budget or just a separate policy recommendation, I'm not sure.
Maybe.
I think
it could be something I just take up with Councillor Ali outside the meeting, which I'd be very happy to do.
I think with the three recommendations there, they're all fine. Whatever OSC wants to do, we can write those down. I would encourage OSC maybe to think about whether this is a review of the budget or of council policy, though. Because council policy takes us every place that we do things, but this is an OSC of the budget.
So I mean, in terms, I understand that, Duncan, and I've already spoken to Jasmine around the delivery of the policy with schools. So if we wanted to make a simple recommendation on that particular issue, it would be that a small amount of the commitment that we're making to deliver that service is put aside to make the child mental health facility on Rye Lane accessible to pupils with no recourse to public funds. That would be the recommendation.
I suppose following on from what Duncan said, mine's not a recommendation, mine's more clarification and more detail on the transformation section, and maybe that's a policy suggestion to Jasmine that part of the funding is for proper transformation in the way we deliver with our partners, because I got the impression I didn't really get much information back about what that 1.282 million was going to be used for. It was very up in the air. It's part of the new mental health provision, but it wasn't very clear about what that's going to be used for. It was like, how are we going to work with our partners? But I'd need to know what does that look like, and in what way.
Any more detail on that?
I think the department is trying to put more into the report to give you more detail in the next draft. Whether that will be adequate or not, I don't know.
Because it was just one line at the bottom of the table, and there was literally no information about it.
So a recommendation that asks the report to provide more information, but you may need to come back again in a different place, but it's a perfectly reasonable recommendation.
Is that a specific budget line? Because at the end of the
you
table.
made that clear, yeah.
Councillor Ali?
So just to supplement that, I think David Quirk agreed a list of projects or a list of what they were going to do it, but I wanted a Moscow analysis on it. So, please.
Moscow analysis.
So, must have, should have, would have, could have, and so you're almost prioritising by which of these projects will the world stop if we don't do them, versus, so I carelessly used the words flight of fancy, but what I was trying to say was when you go through your projects list, there are some things of, hey, if we had everything else, here is the really nice to do project, which could enable all of these things over here. So it's just about actually in that projects list, which are the absolute mandatories. You can Google it, it's a pretty common thing.
We talked about what was required by statute and what wasn't, didn't we?
Yeah.
Basically,
That's one way, but that's not necessarily.
No. But
That recommendation.
well, I don't know.
I would prefer to have the statute because I think the Moscow, I take your point, but I feel like that is a process that you go through. I assume when you look at the budget to say, you know, and people will have different arguments about whether free swim and gym is a must to have or a nice to have. And I don't know also about officers' time, but I feel like, yes, it's useful to know what is required by statute, it's just not.
Okay, we'll do the statute one. Yep.
The regulation I was going to make, which is a bit related to that, which
Okay,
came out a number of times, was can we recommend that an assessment of the reach of key projects is provided in the budget analysis. So we talked about how many children will the Shore Centres for Mental Health reach, how many children. So I'd put in a recommendation that for major politics was kind of related, and it's Jasmine's brief as well.
Okay. Can we agree on that? Yep. Good. Right. Jane, did you want anything on care packages, service users? No? Okay. Leanne, was there anything? You okay? Okay. Eleanor's not here. Victoria, was there anything on? Okay. You covered that, Lily? Yeah, okay. All right. So is there anything on the adult and children's services? Anything else we need to add, consider? No? Okay, let's move on to Rebecca Lurie. Reorganisation of Parks team. Do you have anything else? No? You covered that, yeah. Alice, communications, anything on that? Parking charges we've already talked about. Gavin, yeah?
Yeah.
Jack, income, we don't start that debate again now, forget that. Leisure contract? No? Okay. Tree management, Peter? No, good. Anything else on Rebecca's area? No? Right, good. Kieran, this is for the general fund.
There's a conversation.
Yeah, it's not for the budget now. Climate emergency, carbon again.
Well, I wanted specific targets for carbon reduction per year and the cost in reducing that.
Can we put that in?
Can we do that?
That's a policy thing?
Yes. I know. But what about, it should be in the budget how much it would cost to reduce carbon by, 5-10% per year and to work it out. I don't know.
But isn't that a policy project? But maybe
But it is also a financial target as well.
But doesn't maybe the recommendation on providing a sustainability impact could include specifically in how far this will go to meeting our carbon reduction emissions specifically?
Yeah.
If next year you provided you know this stuff better than me, but an assessment of the sustainability impact, including how the measures contribute to carbon reduction targets, I might cover it.
So I think we got a recommendation already that is asking future budget reports to have a carbon assessment of a sustainability impact. The budget in any event, both capital revenue and indeed HRA and housing investment in programme will include budget provision for items as they are identified. So I think we're really going back to policy here, and I can tell you here openly, I haven't got a clue what carbon neutrality by 2030 is going to cost. I know it'll be a big number, but it will be based upon the reality of individual capital and revenue schemes that will be worked up and carried through programmes, and that's kind of part of the climate change director work that he's. It will absolutely go down to the budget, and indeed the 350 million on district heating stuff that we were talking about earlier is already in the budget, and some of the regeneration schemes are carbon neutral. So, and it will be very difficult sometimes to extract from those projects the carbon neutrality costs because it's all so wrapped up. So I think you've already well covered off the fact that we need to be more explicit about sustainability impact on the budget moving forward, trying there may be a recommendation for us from a policy point of view about incorporating financial impacts and funding sources for these things moving forward. That's something we're all horribly conscious of, but it's a bit of an adventure. It's a journey for us all at the moment, but it again shows that OSC have actually properly looked at that aspect of this budget.
Should we add that then? Yeah. Anybody happy with that? Yeah. Thank you.
That's just baking financial impacts of sustainability changes and the 2030 carbon neutrality into all programmes as necessary. Or that we can work out the detail of the words in the morning, but it's that sort of thing, isn't it?
Excellent. Thank you. Capacity at Tooley Street we've already covered. Agency staff, Gavin, did you have anything?
No, not specifically on that, no.
Okay. Blue badge, IT strategy, blah, blah, blah. Homelessness, Peter, anything?
I think this one might be ruled out of order, but it's
everything else has,
it was more towards the point that we're talking a lot about a homelessness crisis, but and we touched both in the budget meeting and in council assembly yesterday about the range of things that we're doing in that area. But there was no additional funding towards tackling the housing crisis, and the kind of flagged figure was a kind of historical commitment. So whether we could suggest considering additional commitments to tackle the crisis side of things.
Well, I think it has to be pointed out we put, is it £3 million additional resources into the homelessness budget over the last couple of years, so the Cabinet has already responded to a crisis, which it has, on the face of it, now got under some control. So putting extra money in would be a bit of a shock, and where we are at the moment is very reliant upon one-off government grants. So I'm not sure whether there's a point about asking Cabinet to ensure that government continue to provide those one-off grants on a sustainable basis. You can ask Cabinet to put some concentration on that possibly, because those grants are extremely important now to sustaining a service that's relatively under control, but it has had huge investment.
I take the point. I'm happy to take chess there. So whether we include that or not.
I think at this moment in time, I think we should just wait and see. I mean, I think the Cabinet's making a sufficient commitment at the moment. It's really, we just see what happens, develops over the next 12 months. That's my view, but I don't know what other people think. Okay. You remember the movement of capital to reserves? Did you want to say anything on that? No. Okay. Right. Okay. District heating, rough sleepers.
I think on district heating, the point's already been made in the interview with Kieran around the cumulative impacts on that. In terms of rough sleepers, I did want to just make a suggestion for the minutes, whether that's can be a budget recommendation or not. I don't know. Essentially, that recommendation would be that as we cannot offer council housing to people with no recourse to public funds, that we don't have a statutory duty to, that we should add no recourse to public funds adults to our intermediate housing list that we are drawing up, so that they could be considered for social housing in the private sector. That, again, that may be a policy change rather than...
That's definitely a policy change.
Yeah.
No, I don't think it is. Jason.
On district housing, I think it might be prudent for us to... District heating. Did I say district housing? Yeah. District heating. For us to know where the £3 million will be allocated, or how the £3 million will be allocated, because we're a bit unsure as to how that's going to be allocated unless you disagree.
Yeah, I could make a suggestion in response to that. We've got is it the 6th of March, I think, we've got a Housing Scrutiny Commission. We could ask the Cabinet member to come, because he said he could get us more detail, to come. We could put that on the agenda for that meeting and then dig into how that £3 million is going to be spent, because we're going to be discussing district heating at that meeting again anyway, so we could do that instead.
Yeah, I think that's fine. I'm happy with that.
Dig into it then.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, great. We move on to Johnson C2. Alice, in conjunction. Oh no, we better skip that one. Carbon offset fund. We've already dealt with that, haven't we? Planning survey. We don't do that. Yeah. Energy efficiency standard. No, that's not really a policy. Sorry.
So I just wanted to flag up that I did ask a question about asking larger private sector developers to contribute more towards planning costs, which isn't reflected there. But I think that was picked up. That was raised.
Yeah, you raised it earlier. Yeah. We got that, haven't we?
Just say, in response to that, Simon Bevan did say there might be an issue about whether or not officers, because you talked about officers.
Well, I don't think we're talking about that level of detail. What we're talking about is, how did you phrase it? They're making more of a contribution, right? We're not saying what that contribution it should be, right? Or how it manifests itself. Exactly.
But that's covered in the first recommendation as one of the examples,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Okay, move on to Evelyn's now. Alice, knife crime young people.
I mean, I think for me this just goes into some of the other recommendations that we should have a clear assessment of the impact and the predicted impact of some of the investments and how many young people we think it will reach. So I think it's within. It's the same thing for me as around the mental health provision.
Yeah, that's a similar thing, isn't it?
So I guess the recommendation would be something to request that Cabinet provides an assessment of the impact of key budgetary, and maybe we should specify budgetary measures impacting children and young people, including mental health provision and efforts to tackle knife crime. There might be others in there, but in my head those are two that stick out, and the Sure Start sectors.
Yeah.
Chair, did this come specifically out of a question or a statement about the Positive Futures Fund and the extension of it? Because I think there's a very specific question, which is, can Cabinet feedback on the outcomes and the positive impacts of the Positive Future Funds and the ambition for the next tranche?
Yeah. You're right. Maybe it's a separate recommendation.
Because that's quite a big chunk of money, and there's another chunk of 250,000, I think, going in. So clearly it's had some impact, but I don't think that's been reported back through Cabinet yet, and that would probably give you the outcome analysis that you rightly asked for.
Okay, do it that way. Yep.
Yeah, that makes sense as long as we keep the other one on reach of other measures. But I think you're right that is a specific one because it's a specific pot of money.
Okay, great. Thanks. Jane, anything? Health visitor? No, I don't think it was.
I'm so sorry, I've looked at it and I've said it, I don't remember. I'm so sorry.
I was going to say, because mine, I don't recognise prep. How is this going? I never said that.
So I don't worry.
I think it was.
Oh, okay.
I've morphed into.
Okay.
Never mind.
Public safety.
Oh, sorry, Chair.
Oh, did you want to
Chair,
say
can we actually discuss PrEP? Because, my namesake corrected the record. But actually, I do think that this is an area that we should perhaps be making recommendation on. We know that PrEP is a very effective drug in reducing HIV sort of infection rates. It's gone down by 73% in the last year, in part thanks to the rollout of PrEP.
I think we as a council have agreed unanimously that there should be a full rollout of PrEP to everyone that needs it. We're talking relatively little amounts of money of public health, public health money in terms of actually reducing infection rates of HIV. And I think we should be making a recommendation that we should be looking to bridge the gap as a council, given that we are a borough that has significantly high numbers of LGBTQ people, and also communities that historically have higher HIV infection rates. I think this is probably one of those things that the budget could be doing very constructively.
I mean, to note that the council's PrEP cost is coming out of the public health budget. This used to be an NHS cost transferred to the council through public health budget, which is stretched and is probably one of the highest spending sexual health, public health functions in the country, certainly in London.
Population.
It does, but it also reflects the level of funding that came with it, which has subsequently been cut. So I think finding resources from council budget for a public health function is an interesting issue, and maybe that's something that OSC would like Cabinet to consider, whether there is any cross-referencing of general fund and ring-fence public health grants. I think there's a real issue, and I think Kevin Fenton made the point quite well about what pressure is coming on government to provide more PrEP capability, because it seems that demand is outstretching at the moment what government itself is able to provide on the PrEP front. So I'm sure there's an issue there, and I've probably confused it, but I would beware of the recommendation that says that the council puts more investment in. That kind of makes it easy for government. Mindful of local needs. Sorry.
Sure. I appreciate what you're saying, and I accept as well that the financing side of it. But we have made a policy position as a council that we do believe in the full rollout of PrEP. This is an opportunity for us to actually honour that commitment that we made last year, and I feel that that would be an appropriate thing for us to recommend.
Well, can we put it this way then? If I can just paraphrase what Duncan has said, if we have a recommendation to the Cabinet to look at cross-referencing between the general fund and the public health, if we do something like that, and then such as which can be put to such uses as increasing the PrEP provision, something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, I'd be as specific as possible about saying that to reach full rollout for everyone that that requires PrEP.
Okay, to assist in reaching full rollout, something like that. Yeah.
Okay.
That'd be okay.
Chair, not being an expert on this, but there is already 3 additional payments in the budget to do with PrEP. One is the extensions of capacity. So is that not saying what we're saying now?
There is already growth in the budget, and you're absolutely right, for more PrEP investment.
As it's saying to capacity, does that mean that everyone who needs it?
That's to the point that where we're using everything that is available,
right.
But there is a demand beyond that. It's my understanding, which is a bit wacky.
Okay, next one. So should we stick with what I proposed then?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Mayor of Public Safety, Southwark Advisors, anything? No. Okay, thank you. Okay, Leanne, refugees.
Just a question on board.
Oh, okay, fine. Jack, community safety.
There was something there, but I think that's probably for future budget.
Okay, Peter.
Just in terms of line items that we asked for close monitoring of, I think 128, in particular the reduction in funding for HIV, sexual health spending for Black African communities based on changing need. So just as per Alice's clarification of my point previously about clarifying where we want to pick up specific points with cabinet members.
In terms of impact?
Yeah.
Okay, we've discussed this previously.
We have an equalities item, don't we, somewhere in the recommendations? I think, yes, that would be a really good inclusion.
Yes, as an example, to incorporate that, yeah.
So the quarterly review would apply to that.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, noise team.
Can I just ask just a quick question? What did everyone else hear? I heard them say they're just shifting the resources around so that it's the same service, but you're going to get more focus on the evenings and weekends where you get the most call out, and therefore it'll be thinner elsewhere. Is that what everyone else heard?
Yeah.
Are we okay with that?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Good. Let's move on to Vicky then in terms of her department.
Yeah, I did have a recommendation there, Chair.
I thought you might. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, the recommendation would be that the council has a fund which is negotiated with the Southwark Law Centre for a specialist advice contract dealing with Southwark residents who have no recourse to public funds. The evidence from the contract that the Law Centre has with Lewisham has been that it's saved them £136,000 in 6 months. So a small grant that we could give for that specialist advice contract would cost us money up front, but across the period of the financial year would save us money on top of that. So that would be my recommendation.
Could I suggest a slight amendment to that? My limited knowledge of Lewisham says that we're starting from a higher point, so we're already spending that money on our arrangement with Southwark Law Centre. There may be something we don't know, though, that Lewisham are now doing that we are doing differently, so I think it would be good for us to review what the contract arrangements are with Lewisham to see what opportunities there are for doing our job differently, or having a different relationship with the Law Centre, because I think our investment in the Southwark Law Centre, or that facility generally, has been much higher than Lewisham's has been.
Yeah.
It's just finding out what they've done that we haven't done already.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true, Duncan. I mean, I think the specific suggestion and issue is that there is a specialist advice contract for residents who have no recourse to public funds in the borough that we do not have with the Law Centre, that is helping those residents with their interactions with the Home Office, and so there consequently is saving the council money. And the reason why I bring that as a special item is because Lewisham also went through a similar process as us in reviewing our no recourse to public funds approach in regards to Home Office staff at the same time, and we haven't made that same case. So if it's possible, I would like to keep that as a specific incentive, but I do agree that it is something that we would need to have a conversation with Lewisham about as we go about drafting that.
Just as a slight amendment to that, take your point about it, you know, you want to make a recommendation about it being a specific fund for that particular group of people, because, you know, this is a complicated issue where, you know, the comparison between Lewisham and Southwark's funds is perhaps not apples for apples and pears for pears. So why don't we ask the Cabinet to investigate the possibility of developing a fund as per Lewisham's fund that you've just outlined? Because if we simply recommend that it happens, I don't feel like I've got enough information right now with regard to the comparison between the services provided between Southwark and Lewisham in order to make that recommendation. But if we ask the Cabinet to investigate it, nudge them in that direction, I'd be more comfortable with that.
And report back.
Yeah.
I mean, if the committee are minded to support that amendment, fine. I mean, to be honest, I would prefer that there is a clear recommendation from this committee that a specialist contract dealing in that particular issue does go as a recommendation. Cabinet can look into it and reject it if they deem that it's not necessary. But I do think that there is an opportunity there for us to help our most vulnerable residents and save the council money, and so that should be a recommendation from the committee. If the committee are only minded to support that recommendation based on the amendment, then I will support that. Otherwise, it's quite clear what I'm asking for, and I think it's a win-win for us.
Okay, so
I think the amendment seems sensible. I think investigating it and then acting on that information we may receive
Well, I've said to them to report back, so one would hope that they report back when we've got a meeting in March and another meeting in May, is it? April. So should we say by our April meeting? Would that be all right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's plenty of time, isn't it? So can we agree that proposal on that amended basis? Yeah. Thank you. Right, Alice, cross for peace. Nothing on that.
I think it was just the question, and it's because we've got the ongoing piece of work about the pots of funding isn't easy to get. I feel like we should just pursue that through ask. Yeah, we could ask for it separately. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Frontline services. You remember that? Okay. Equalities assessment, Peter. Yeah, covered. I don't worry about that. Okay, so let's move on to Richard. Peter.
304 with so line 304 on waste and clean, and I think that was in regards to increasing weight in terms there. So this isn't one that's an equalities issue; it's a service quality kind of issue. So if that could be noted in the list of specific line items where we want the current members to come back on.
Is that agreed? Yeah. Okay. Climate change research. Nothing on that, Peter? No?
I'm not wholly sure it's necessary, but it was the fact that we've got that 2 million earmark, but it's very open as to what it to what will be done with it. I don't know if there's something about going to the relevant commission with details.
That's a good idea, so I'll bring it up at the next meeting in March. But I think most of it's going towards capital projects, isn't it? But it'd be good to discuss that with members of the Environment Commission. Yeah. Thanks.
Okay, lights are going up. Wheelie bins, well, that's not a financial issue, but charities, was there nothing there, was there, remember?
No,
Okay.
I got the impression that
Okay.
because
Yeah.
using that service from the
Electrical charge points, there's nothing there. Okay. Victoria, the bulky waste collection? Yeah?
It's not a real recommendation, you
Yeah.
should look at that more.
Okay,
because
fine,
I think
good.
there's a wider impact than he's saying. I think it's a bit like what Peter was saying about, well, if we charge that, there's certain things that we could review later on and say.
Okay. Okay, fine. Construction waste was just, we were talking about that in terms of that being the major fly tipping element.
I think he's going to look into that.
He is.
Yeah.
Did you want to say anything about the charge, Victor?
Well, I was just going to say, like, where did everyone get to with the whole being charged for bins, especially after your...
Yeah.
Yeah. We're all going to jump on that.
Yeah. I'm not on the list, but I think I spoke both in the meeting and in the break about this at length. The £25 charge for quote unquote losing your bin, which is essentially people having their bins stolen. I think that is fundamentally unfair, and it's £50,000 saving, so not an insignificant amount of money, but also in the context of the budget, not a huge amount of money. And it's one of those specific things that I think is pretty clear cut as well. We either do it or we don't. And I think the basic idea of residents in this borough waking up in the morning, someone's nicked their bin, which is a bin that this council makes them use, and then they get charged 25 quid for it, is wrong. And I don't think that's quite been thought through as much as it might have been. And I would make a recommendation. I've written a recommendation, if you like, if I can read it out. The recommendation being to remove line 206, the £25 charge for replacement bins from the budget. OS believes that charging for new bins unfairly impacts on residents who have bins stolen through no fault of their own and potentially incentivises the theft of bins. So that would be my recommendation, I'd suggest.
Thank you. Any comment on that? People agreed with that?
think also that something, this is slightly different, but I'm in absolute agreement with you. But if there is a household or a number of households which keep repeatedly having them stolen, then we work with them to help that not carry on. You know, we were talking about painting them, putting your door number on, or, you know, something like that. Then we should actively try and just see why it is. Why is it going? Have we got any idea where they go? I had one. Yeah, where do they go? I've seen people who are having parties, you know, that literally pulling somebody else's bin along with beer in or something, you know, because it's the easiest way to move it.
We don't want to talk about Liberal Democrat facts.
No, sorry about that. So I'm talking about my estate. But no, maybe we also just work with people. If there is someone who always seems to be losing their bin, I'm sure most people lose them once or twice and that's it. So I agree, it's not
like
fair.
raising that separately outside of recommendations with the cabinet.
Yeah, absolutely. No, talk to Richard about it. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Okay, Jack, the app.
Yep. Yeah, it's very simple. That a small fee is considered as a part of the budget that goes towards developing an app that helps people use their bulky waste collection. It would reduce the cost impact for residents, and it would reduce carbon in terms of extra rounds being done. So it's pretty simple.
Is that okay, Duncan? Yeah. Good. Is agreed?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, Everton, have you got your copious, voluminous notes to hand?
First, may I apologise for not completing the questions.
Don't worry, ran out of time.
I will type the rest of them out just for completeness to send to you. So let me see if I can make sense.
Yeah, what have you got for Councillor Pollock? The great Houdini.
How's it?
Okay, question from Jack. Social regeneration, are we doing enough with our strategic partners?
Yeah, that's not a budget issue.
Okay. And you mentioned something about Preston Council. Leanne Werner, something about funding new homes through mixture of Section 106.
No, I think I mentioned carbon reduction, but that's not a recommendation. That's a policy thing.
Next one.
Okay. Right, next one then we've got Councillor Stephanie Cryan, questions.
Does anybody anything on the support for it? I know it's only very small item. Budget. No. Okay. Okay, move on to Stephanie, please.
Okay, Jack Buck, seller for railway arches and displacement across the borough for a number of businesses. Are we putting in staff time, spending resources to keep them in the borough? Is there something we are working with National Rail?
That's not a fund.
Councillor Baboudi mentions Pioneers Fund. Councillor Leon Werner, not going to meet climate targets alone. How are you going to work with partners?
Yeah, that's fine. I've already said that. Thank you.
Anything else on Stephanie?
No, nothing.
Anybody else wants to raise anything on Stephanie's portfolio?
Councillor Peter John.
Yes. Oh, time to get stuck in. Yes, we'll be a couple of hours now.
When he was talking, back. He hadn't got used to her coming in for the back. And he was like, wait, I said that without moving my mouth. She got the microphone. Sometimes she had the microphone, sometimes she didn't. It was quite scary. It would come from right there.
I was going to recommend the removal of the budget for the microphone.
Councillor MacDonald, level of investment with comms, communications easy target to cut. Well, that's probably saying anything further on that. Okay, question from Peter Buditer, leader. Stuck in 10 years of efficiency and savings, how are you taking stock of efficiencies?
I think you mentioned that just before we left, actually.
Okay. You had an issue, Councillor Woodford, about forward planning, like 2 to 3 year budget.
Yeah. What I wanted, it's not specific to this budget, obviously, but it's the point of sort of, I guess, what we call future proofing, if I can put it that way, in the sense of forward planning, and we've got a whole host of intelligence through the council. So I mean, today I think we're all given from the housing section a market trend report. Yes. So obviously there's a certain amount of crystal ball gazing that goes on. There's a lot of collection of statistics about how Southwark's changing in terms of the demographics, its population, and obviously we should be preparing for the Southwark of the future. I mean, we're investing so much in social regeneration of one description or another, in terms of planning for health, education and other services. And I think, it strengthens our argument when we're in debate with central government over future funding. So I can't see that this doesn't go on, if you understand what I mean, Duncan, to a certain extent. It's just that certainly I'm not aware that that's all that information is pulled together as what Southwark will look like in 10 years' time, for instance. Not that it's going to be an accurate document, no projected document ever is, but I do think we know that certain things will be constant. We know there will be extra demands on our services in various guises. So I just think there needs to be some sort of I'm trying to think of the right word. There needs to be some sort of I was going to say internal navel gazing, but that's probably not the best description. But there needs to be some sort of think tank approach as within the council as to how the borough is going to evolve and change over the next 10 years and how that's going to impact on our services, good, bad or indifferent. And it can be a host of scenarios. One's not saying that there is one particular scenario, but I think it'd be useful for members. It'd be useful for planning, across. I mean, planning with a small p for the council in terms of how the council looks and is shaped for the future.
Yeah, and that you also need to look at environmental refugees, climate change. I think that's a key part, flooding, all those things. So yeah, I think that's really important.
Thoughts, Duncan? Yeah, thanks for that.
So from an OS point of view, and I think you made the point on Monday a number of times, I think it would be useful for Cabinet, unashamedly, to have the reminder of the fact that we need to revert to medium-term budgeting, 3-year budgeting, 4-year budgeting, as soon as we appropriately can. You probably heard me speak on Monday. I just don't think it's appropriate at the moment, and it's a bit complicated. But we shouldn't take our eye off the need to do that. And if we get a 3-year settlement this year, then that becomes a little bit easier to discuss. So I think you should do that anyway, actually, personally. But I think the other component within all of that is data. What we found with the the discussions with the DFE about DSG high needs is we've got a fantastic data pack, and we understand what the numbers are, why they're there, where they come from, what they mean, and that puts us in a very powerful position when we start lobbying for our £80 million back. And as a lesson, as we move into a new era where maybe we can do 3-year budgeting, 4-year budgeting even again, a reminder to the organisation about having a view about how we capture data against all our services and use that data to aid decision taking, I think is really, really powerful. And it's a hard thing to do, and it relies a bit on technology, but not exclusively actually. But having data in this new era of government funding is going to be really, really important and really powerful.
Yeah, and you know, I'm at risk of starting something else off again, but I mean, you know, the council has a good record in terms of innovation, and you know, we set up the Housing Commission, as you know, that came forward with a number of scenarios in terms of housing stock and housing management. You know, it went through a whole process of debate and discussion within the council. I'm not saying that we go and spend another £50,000 whatever on a commission, but what I'm saying is we have that information, we have those statistics within the council, and you know, they need to be pulled together to inform a medium and longer term financial strategy. And you know, it's only prudent as far as I'm concerned, because none of us want to be, whoever's in control of the council in 2022, having to pick up you know, a sort of financial situation where we've got to make very, very difficult decisions. You're nodding. Oh, that's good.
Yes, Chair. So I think a recommendation to Cabinet along the lines of thinking about data and information management to help inform those future budget strategies would be a helpful one, and
yes,
one to come back to in future years. Because a lot of the questions you've asked over the last few days have been about data, actually, and how many of what, and you know, what's the outcome, and you know, how much goes in to get what out, and that is actually quite helpful when you're seeking income, when you're seeking government funding, when you're trying to work out whether that is more productive than that in terms of your service delivery. So, and we can always do better at it.
Okay, so we put a recommendation in. Yeah?
Yes.
Okay. Good. Anything else? Any other questions? Sorry, Alice.
I had one which is probably more repeatable, but I just think there should be a recommendation on how the council can ensure that the budget is kind of accessible and understandable to Southwark residents, because I think, but I think if you go on the website and you try and find stuff, and you know, like when you make changes in government, you can then go to a calculator and see what does this mean for me. And I'm not saying you should go that far, but I do feel some short, concise document setting out what are the main proposals in the budget and how that will impact on me would be quite useful. And I know council tax will be the main story, but there's so much stuff in here, and I feel like if you Google it, you get your story from Southwark News rather than necessarily the budget. So it would be good, and we did discuss comms, but if there is a simple recommend that the Cabinet explores how to ensure the budget is accessible and understandable, maybe not understandable, to Southwark residents would be a good one, I think. Even if it's, you know, top 5 things we're investing in, top 3 things that would change, something like that.
Well, I know where that one's going to be passed, but no, it's perfectly reasonable to be open and transparent with our residents, and it's a struggle with a budget, but yes, we should aspire to do that.
So we're making a recommendation to that effect? Good. Okay. Okay, so is there anything else on the policy resources strategy that we need to discuss? No? No? Okay, right, so let's move on. Thank you, Duncan. Thanks, Rob.
Sorry, can I just recap
Yes.
on timelines, therefore, we will gather in the morning to pull together these recommendations. We'll get those circulated to the whole of OSC as soon as we possibly can tomorrow, but I'm just guessing that won't be much before lunchtime, early afternoon. I think from Tuesday's point of view at Cabinet, there's no expectation of a rerun of the previous policy resources strategy, so the report is pretty much as it is. So the main flavour for Tuesday will be to receive your recommendations. So I guess I'm probably just trying to manage expectations there to give you time to come back with recommendations with any tuning or changes that are necessary. And this process it will run into Friday and may well run through the weekend as well. But as long as Cabinet have got a full view of your recommendations for Tuesday to take a view on, that might be the best we can do. The report they do receive, however, will include some of the changes in terms of format and presentation that we talked about before. But we'll do whatever we can in the time available.
And the deadline is Monday.
For publication of the report, yeah, I don't know, Norman, to what extent we can take the final list of questions as agreed to Cabinet on the table, or to what extent we can publish that on the Tuesday.
You could do. You could take it on Tuesday.
Well, clearly we'd rather get it out before then, and we could get a draft out before then maybe, and then if there are any final alterations, definitely hit the Tuesday table. Thanks, that's been very helpful, thank you.
Cheers. Thank you too. Okay, let's move on. We've got an item on the work programme. I was going to suggest, unless anybody's got any sort of burning ideas at the moment, that we defer this. They speak too soon as always. Go on then, go on.
It's just to flag up that at the start of this cycle we did, or actually at the end of last cycle, we did say that we would examine the report that came out of the Southwark LGBT consultation. That's now nearing a year old, so I'm conscious that we need to put that on the agenda soon before it becomes redundant.
My understanding, I totally agree with you. My understanding was before Shelley left that she had tried to approach the relevant person, and they couldn't they couldn't agree on an exact date and time, or they couldn't make the meeting dates that we had in the diary at that point before Christmas. So it's a job for you now, Everton, I'm afraid, to chase that up. You can speak to Councillor Chamberlain outside, but there should be some sort of notes on this outstanding item. They're due to come before this committee at some juncture. Yeah.
Okay, I'll look into it.
So if there's nothing else, we can talk about that again in March, if that's okay.
Chair, can I ask a question as a newer member to Overview and Scrutiny? There has been a particular issue in Faraday Ward which I think could merit a call into Overview and Scrutiny, which has been the systematic breakdown and failure of the Aylesbury boiler house. 3 of the 4 boilers there have broken, and that's following quite a serious investment by the council a small number of years ago into that boiler house, and has caused wide-scale disruption and potentially medium costs, large costs to the council in the medium term. Is that something that we could consider for a call-in to have a proper report on that and to quiz officers on what the plan is moving forward?
So, I could be wrong, but I don't think we could call it in because it would need a cabinet decision to be called in, is that correct?
Yeah.
So, but I would be more than happy on the 9th of March to add that to our agenda so that we could have a proper session with the officers and the cabinet member and any local residents who want to come along, so we can have a proper scrutiny of that particular issue because it's housing based. It seems perfectly appropriate, and it just happens I was starting discussions with Everton today about the agenda for that meeting. We were already going to have a general thing about district heating, but actually having something specific will probably be quite useful, I think. So,
yeah, it makes more sense that it goes there with relevant officers, and all the ward members can attend if they wish. Okay, is that everything? Thank you very much. We got there in the end. Thanks for your time. Cheers.
Long week, isn't it?
Yeah, there's always one.
My advice. It's not that. It could be a lot worse.
So I'm writing it down.
Sorry.
Yeah.